The screen of my phone lit up, casting a cold, artificial glow across our bedroom at 11:30 p.m. It was a text from my wife, Sarah. She was already in bed, but she'd apparently stepped out to the hallway to send it. Asterisk, I'll spend the week with my sick mother, please don't call. She needs total quiet and I need to focus on her. I'll update you when I can. Asterisk. I stared at the words, a knot tightening in my chest. My wife, Sarah, was 32, and her mother, my mother-in-law, Brenda, had been struggling with her health, but this felt off. It felt clipped, almost rehearsed. I sighed, turning over, trying to swallow the sudden unease that had settled in my gut. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself she was just stressed. But the irony was cruel. 2 rows behind me, in seat 14B on the flight to Chicago for a business conference, sat my wife, clutching the hand of a man who definitely wasn't me. My name is David. I'm 35, a structural engineer who values precision, blueprints, and the comfort of a predictable life. For the past 6 years, Sarah and I had built a home that felt like a sanctuary. We had a comfortable routine, Sunday morning coffees, the way she liked her toast slightly charred, and the quiet ritual of reading books in the living room while the rain tapped against the window. We were happy. Or, at least, I thought we were. That morning, she had kissed my cheek, her skin smelling of her signature vanilla perfume, and told me to have a safe trip. I watched her drive away, thinking she was heading to her mother's small cottage on the edge of town. I sat in my seat, the hum of the airplane engine vibrating through the floorboards. I had booked this flight last minute to surprise my regional manager, but the real reason I was here was to get away from the mounting pressure at the office. I didn't see her board. I didn't see her walk down the aisle. I only saw her when the flight attendant passed by, and Sarah leaned over to whisper something to the man next to her, a man I recognized instantly. It was Mark, my own brother. My heart didn't just sink, it shattered. I felt the breath leave my lungs in a sharp, painful wheeze. I stayed low in my seat, my hands trembling as I clutched the armrests, listening to the muffled sound of their laughter, a sound I thought was reserved only for us. The next few hours were the longest of my life. I sat in that seat, staring at the back of the headrest in front of me, listening to the soft, rhythmic hum of the jet engines. Every few minutes, I would risk a glance, just a fraction of a movement, to see the top of Sarah's head resting against Mark's shoulder. It felt like watching a slow-motion car crash, one where you're the passenger, powerless to touch the brakes. How could this happen? My brother, Mark, had been the best man at our wedding. He'd been the one to help me move the heavy furniture when we bought our first house. We had shared childhood scars, secrets, and late-night beers for years. I tried to search my memory for a single sign, a flicker of betrayal, but all I could recall were dinners where we all laughed together. I felt like a stranger looking into a life I no longer recognized. When the plane landed, I waited until the cabin cleared, keeping my head down and my cap pulled low. I followed them from a distance through the terminal, watching as they moved with a familiarity that made my skin crawl. They didn't act like secret lovers, they acted like a couple who had been together for years. They shared a cab, and I, driven by a cold, numbing adrenaline, hailed the one right behind them. "Follow that car," I told the driver, my voice steady in a way that terrified me. They didn't go to a hotel. They went to a quiet, upscale apartment complex on the north side of the city. I watched from the street as they walked into the lobby, Mark's hand resting comfortably on the small of Sarah's back. My hands were gripping the door handle so hard my knuckles were white. Over the next 2 days, the sick mother story fell apart completely. I made a phone call to Brenda's house, not to check on her, but just to hear her voice. She answered on the third ring, her voice raspy but clearly not in the dire straits Sarah had described. "David? Is that you? I haven't heard from Sarah in days. Is everything all right?" I didn't tell her. I couldn't. I just made a vague excuse about a work conflict and hung up. The realization hit me then, this wasn't just a betrayal of my marriage, it was a calculated, cold-blooded severance of my entire world. They weren't just sneaking around, they were living a double life, waiting for me to be far enough away that I wouldn't notice the floor falling out from under me. I spent those nights in a cheap motel, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the room screaming at me. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way you'd expect. I was hollow. I realized then that I hadn't been fighting for my marriage for months, I had been fighting for a ghost. By the third day, the initial shock had cooled into a sharp, crystalline clarity. I wasn't going to storm that apartment and make a scene. That would have been messy, public, and ultimately, beneath the dignity of the life I had worked so hard to build. Instead, I did what I did best, I gathered data. I spent the morning at a quiet cafe near their building, watching. I saw them leave for lunch, laughing, Sarah wearing a scarf I had bought her for our last anniversary. It was a small, stinging reminder that she was still using the things I gave her to build a life with someone else. I took photos, not out of spite, but because I knew I would need them for the endgame. I didn't need to hire a private investigator. I had my own tools. Through a shared cloud account I had set up for our home expenses, one she had foolishly never thought to check, I accessed her digital activity. It was all there, the flight confirmations, the dinner reservations, the messages between her and Mark that dated back months. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning a future. They were discussing how to divide our assets, how to handle me, and how to start over once I was out of the picture. The betrayal was total. My own brother, the man I'd shared everything with, was orchestrating the dismantling of my life alongside my wife. I decided to play their game, but with a different set of rules. I called Sarah that evening. My voice was calm, measured, almost tender. "Hey," I said, leaning back in my motel chair, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. "I'm finishing up here earlier than expected. The project was a success. I'll be back home by tomorrow night. Are you still at your mom's?" There was a pause, a heartbeat too long. "Yes," she said, her voice strained. She's having a rough night, David. Stay at the office if you need to. Don't rush home for me." "I wouldn't dream of it," I replied, a small, sad smile touching my lips. "I'll see you soon, Sarah." I wasn't going home to be a victim. I was going home to ensure that when the dust settled, it was my side of the story that remained standing. I reached out to my lawyer, a man who specialized in the kind of corporate and personal disentanglements that left no room for error. I handed over every piece of evidence, the timestamps, the messages, the photos of them together in Chicago. I wasn't looking for revenge, I was looking for justice. I wanted the truth to be the final word. I arrived home exactly when I said I would, but I wasn't alone. I had invited my parents and Mark's wife, Elena, for a casual dinner. When I walked through the front door, the air in the house felt heavy, suffocating. Sarah was in the kitchen, frantically trying to assemble a plate of appetizers, her face pale when she saw me. "David? You said tomorrow," she stammered, dropping a knife on the counter. "Plans changed," I said, my voice eerily steady. I walked to the living room where my parents and Elena were already seated, looking confused. I gestured for Sarah to join us. She looked at the group, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting an escape. Then, Mark walked in. He had a key, and he clearly expected a quiet evening with Sarah, not a family summit. The color drained from his face the moment he saw me standing there, flanked by our parents. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a punch. I simply placed a thick envelope on the coffee table. Inside were the printouts of their messages, the flight records, and the photos from Chicago. "I went to Chicago, Mark," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet it filled the room. "I saw you both. I've seen everything." The silence that followed was absolute. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, and my father's face hardened into a mask of pure, disappointed rage. Elena, who had been sitting quietly, picked up the photos. As she looked at them, the reality of her own shattered marriage hit her. She didn't scream, she just stood up, looked at Mark with a level of cold contempt that was far more painful than any outburst, and walked out the door. Sarah tried to speak, to offer some pathetic excuse about confusion or falling out of love, but I stopped her with a single look. The game was over. I had already filed the paperwork, and my lawyer had ensured that the financial nest egg they were trying to build by draining my accounts was frozen and documented as evidence of infidelity and fraud. They lost not just their dignity, but their leverage. The aftermath wasn't loud. There were no dramatic scenes in the street. Just the slow, steady hum of justice. Sarah and Mark were left to face the debris of the lives they had tried to build on the wreckage of ours. I'm living in a smaller apartment now. The silence here doesn't feel lonely anymore, it feels like peace. I've learned that the people who stand closest to you are the ones most capable of causing the deepest wounds, but they are also the ones who reveal who you really are when the lights go out. I kept my integrity, and in the end, that was the only thing worth saving. It has been a year since that night, and the dust has finally settled. There are days when I still look at my phone, half expecting to see a text that will turn my world upside down, but then I remember, the power they once held over me is gone. It wasn't taken from me, I reclaimed it the moment I decided that my worth wasn't tied to their lies. I've realized that peace is not the absence of trouble, but the presence of truth. I chose to handle it with dignity, not because they deserved my kindness, but because I deserved my own respect. I didn't need to scream to be heard, and I didn't need to destroy them to save myself. I simply walked away, leaving them with the truth they worked so hard to hide, and that, in itself, was the ultimate consequence. I'm curious, when you've been hurt by the people you trusted most, do you think silence and composure are a stronger response than confrontation? Or do you believe some betrayals demand a louder, more public reckoning? If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting the subscribe button and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps me keep telling these stories. I'd love to hear your perspective. Would you have handled it the way I did?